Hello, I'm Meg Szabo, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the virtual briefing Climate Resilience, from Ambition to Impact. Post COP26, integrating climate action into your company's business plan is more crucial than ever. Over the next hour, we'll explore meaningful solutions for how you can close the gap between ambition and action. We'll discuss the behaviors that set climate leaders apart, the biggest challenges and opportunities that they can face, and how you can measure impact. Before we get started, a couple of announcements. First, I would like to acknowledge our presenting sponsor, Deloitte. If you experience any issues with audio or video quality, please just refresh your browser or use that chat box at the bottom right corner of your screen for support. We would love to hear from you today. If you have any questions for our speakers, please type them in the white tab to the right of the video window and hit submit. You can also engage with us on social media using the hashtag Climate Resilience, and with other attendees in the event chat at the bottom right corner of your screen. And with that, let's get started with our program. Please join me in welcoming Michel Doukeris, CEO of AB InBev, for a conversation on building a climate resilient business.
I'm Carol Masser of Bloomberg Business Week on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg TV, here with Michel Doukeris. He is the CEO of AB InBev. Michel, it is so good to be here with you. Lots to talk about, because when it comes to sustainability, and we're going to hear from the Deloitte team a little bit later on about a survey that they've got out about C-suite executives. They understand that sustainability and climate, it's front and center. It's really important. It's an imperative. And yet when it comes to turning goals or ambitions into actual actions that make an impact, they're having a tough time doing that. You guys are hitting goals sooner rather than later. How are you doing that?
So first of all, thank you for having me. It's a big pleasure to be here and talk to you about that. You know, and people who knows us very well know that sustainability is very close to our heart and everything that we do. We often say, and it's quite true, that beer has this essence of being very inclusive, because we all share a beer in different periods of our lives. And when we are stressed or happy, people are always sharing some things, and we all have memories with that. So very inclusive. Beer is natural, right? Because beer is about water, the grains that we have in the beer, barley, the yeast, and hops, and nothing else. This is what beer is. And beer is very local. So we are into the sustainability business for a very long time. Our company in itself, more than 600 years of history and heritage and relationships with local communities, farmers. And we say that no water, no beer, no barley, no beer. So everything that there is a lot of people talking about today, for us, is very close to our business. And when we see our role in this idea of having clear goals and having clear targets to what we want to do, is because we think that part of what makes our business more efficient and more profitable and better for our local communities is when we have the clear efficiency goals that are very linked to how much water we use, how good the natural sources of water are. This all makes our business more efficient. When we think about our farmers and the impact that they have, but also the yields and the productivity, the more productive they are, the better the environment in which they farm is, the better our business is. And because this is part of our strategy and makes our business better, those are good goals for us to have and carry forward.
Michel, do you think so much of it has to do in terms of AB InBev's success? Because this isn't something you just started doing last week or last year. You guys have been on a strategy for some time. But as you laid out, you're so tied into the world's water supplies, right? Into farming, like what goes into beer, right? You have been able to see the impact of climate change maybe earlier than other folks. It directly impacted your business, and really the survival of AB InBev was you guys helping to change climate change, right? Or impact that, which really could kind of put your business at risk. Is that what makes it different, that you guys have taken goals and strategies and actually put it into action and made an impact?
I think that two things there. One is really this idea of being close to the communities. Of course, you experience firsthand what's happening.
Right.
And because we are in the agriculture business that gets transformed into the final product, in our case, beer, we can see a lot of the fluctuations and the impacts of what happens. And of course, this becomes more important for us to map risks overall. The industry in itself, I think that will be more into the low impact than into the high impact for carbon footprint and everything else. Nevertheless, very important. And because of that, we've been establishing goals for many, many years. We are already in our third set of goals that are measurable goals. So we don't have like ambitions only. We have science-based reduction in carbon emissions. We have water goals for more than 20 years that not only cover the water used in our production, but in farmers. We benchmark 6,000 farmers globally, and we know how much they use in water from seeding to harvest. And now we are extending beyond that because we have our watershed program where we protect watershed. Sometimes we even buy land beyond the walls of our breweries so we can develop and take care of that land because it's important for the rivers and water sources in that region. And we think that this is just the right thing to do. Even before thinking about the business, we think that is the right thing to do for the communities because communities, they thrive around agriculture and water protected sources. And then we can have our business and the development of the local economies and all other things that come from that.
You know, Michel, it's interesting. And I know you've been at the company for a while. Like, I think about what you said, that in terms of water and some other things, you've been doing this for 10 years, 20 years, a long time. You know, climate change, it's taken a long time for, I think, the global world to really understand the impact it's going to have. But you guys identified these risks, you know, decades ago, but because you understood that if you didn't get it right, it was going to be trickier for your business. It's the right thing to do, but it also would be challenging from a business perspective, it sounds like.
It is, because you need to do a good mapping on whatever risks and impacts you can think about. And we have 8 areas of development that we work very hard. And we have to have targets and measure that. Then you need to have your team working with these targets because we want to measure and achieve targets because the impact comes from everything that you do, but you need to be able to prove that you are doing has both an impact on the communities as well as in business. And because all of that in a way makes our business better, we keep on thinking how to do that. Let me give you one example. The example that I love, for example, because it's end-to-end, from what is the right thing to do to the commercial impact. We launched Michelob Ultra Pure Gold, which is an organic beer in the US. When we launched it, made all the sense because people like organic products. Michelob Ultra is a brand that has this health lifestyle, and this was one of the trends in health and wellness. And we launched it. It's a successful product. People love it. But we start having problems to buy the grains because most of the soil and the farms in the United States are no longer organic. And in order to do the transition from non-organic to organic, it takes 2 to 3 years. So majority of the farmers, even though they want to be into the organic business, they cannot bridge the time from the transformation from inorganic to organic. So Michelob Ultra came up with an idea that I find brilliant and very simple, which is for every 6-pack that you buy, we will sign contracts with farmers where we help them for the bridge period so they can make the transformation from inorganic to organic. As they do the transformation, they can do for barley, but they can do for everything else that they seed and harvest as well. And as they go from inorganic to organic, if they can make the bridge, then they become more profitable. They open up a much bigger market because it's no longer commoditized, it's organic grains that they have to sell. And because they make more money, they can further invest and develop their business around them to become more organic. And since we started this project with Michelob Ultra, we have converted like huge amounts of lands and farms in the US to be organic. And these farmers today are in better place than they were before because their business is better, there is more demand, and they're more profitable.
Well, Michel, you talk about then you're helping out the farmers or you're getting consumers, right, to actually be part of the process. Talk to us about that value chain, right? Because you guys can do a lot. You're huge. You're the biggest, company in your space. So you can definitely have an impact, but you're pulling in consumers. You're also working with farmers and others and those along your value chain. How important is that as a part of the process in really making a difference and making an impact?
Yeah, I love this part as well because I think that this is the connection end to end, because there is the impact that we can have as a company that within the walls of the company. Then there is this extended impact on what we like to call the ecosystem of ABI that has farmers, that has the retailers, and I can talk to you about the impact on the retailers as well. And then there is a much bigger impact because when you think about us, 164,000 employees, we have 2.5 billion consumers. The real large scale impact and influence, they come when we have our brands that connect much more with consumers every day. And if we can bring the farmers, the retailers, and the consumers to play a role, then the scale and the reach that ABI can have gets magnified, right? So we are converting all our operations to be renewable energy. But we do have 250 factories. It's a lot, but there are only 250 factories globally. Now Budweiser got into the middle of the energy and is using renewable energy as a broker to influence retailers that are more than 6 million retailers globally to go renewable energy as well. They cannot afford to buy renewable energy by themselves, but Budweiser is now acting as a broker with no profits to buy bulk energy and do the distribution to our retailers. And our consumers, they always play a role. We do this with water, with water.org, where we help women across the globe to have water available, very low cost, that water.org and Stella Artois work together to provide, and they're impacting huge amount of people globally. And our brands are doing always with phone calls here and there, renewable energy, water, organic agriculture, and then you multiply the effect because you have the consumers into the equation as well. And this is very impactful. It's good for business.
So tell me a little bit about what you think, Michel, your targets are for this year. As you said, you guys have laid out 100% in terms of sustainability missions, for 2025. You're hitting some of this ahead of it, like when it comes to energy. What about your targets for this year? And I do wonder, we're still in a pandemic. I'm at home. It's still kind of a world where we take a step forward and maybe half a step backward. What are your targets in terms of sustainability for this year? And what might be some of the obstacles that make it a little tougher?
Yeah, we have our 2025 goals, and we like to set some midterm goals and long-term goals. And the midterm goals are where you really make progress, right? And they are very measurable. And we have water, energy, empowering farmers to be digitally empowered and more productive, and circular packaging. Those are the big 4 goals that we have. And one thing that I'm very excited about for this year as a goal, that's more a year basis, is the number of breweries where we can be carbon neutral. We had last year our first one in China, in Wuhan, is a very big brewery that's 100% carbon neutral, followed by 2 here in Brazil, where I am now visiting. So we have 2 of our facilities that are 100% carbon free. And I would like to advance the number of facilities. Instead of having partial goals being achieved, I would like to have more breweries where we are 100% carbon free. Because when you go from 1 to 3 to 10, people start to realize that yes, it's possible. And this is the first-hand impact. After that, we have the second-hand impact that comes from farmers, logistics, and things that are in our ecosystem, but we can also transform as well. And when I think about challenge and things that would be good to have working better, I really think that this is the type of problem that is very big, right? It's not a problem that Michel can solve for or only one company. So when you think about third sector, public, and private, we need to work more together in finding the solutions.
What specifically, Michel, what specifically would you like to see different with that when it comes to public-private partnerships?
I think that there are like opportunities globally for legislation that can be helpful. In some cases, you have incentives on the transformation of the value chain that can be very helpful as well. And every time that you have these objectives being set by the government, where the industry and the public sector understands the needs of the private sector, and together we start to build the solutions. Solutions will come from regulation, legislation, incentives in the value chain, and technology. Because today, even when people have a lot of ambitions and the technology is not ready yet, or is not available at scale, or at the price that makes the scale possible, then you cannot make the full conversion. So I think that these 4 things, they need to come together, is the public legislation and regulation, the technology, and the ability to invest with the payback that's needed for the private sector.
Michel, if there was one regulation that could change like that, like tomorrow it would be differently, what would it be that you think would make a big impact? And I'm curious about technology. What technology do you think we really need that would make it what you're trying to do even easier?
I think that legislation is not one piece, unfortunately, and is very different country by country. But in terms of legislation, the one thing that everybody that invests, like you and me, you would like to have a long-term horizon that's clear, right? Nobody wants to invest in and out and be in doubt of what's going to be the law of tomorrow. So once you get a little bit of visibility for the long term, then you can make better investment decisions. In terms of technology, there is a lot of breakthroughs today, but there is the technology that is desired, there is the technology that's feasible, so you can scale, and there is the technology that is viable. I think that we are in the period where between desirability and viability, we need to prove still a lot of the ideas that we have to scale them and to be able to use like in 50 different countries, right? So we are not at that point yet. But I think that in terms of carbon and energy, we have a lot coming into the pipeline, and several breakthroughs will be achieved in the next few years. We just need to create the environment in which we can use them, that we can prove them right, so we can scale them up.
So, I'm thinking about, you're in Brazil, you guys are in Africa, you're all over the world. So you're in the developed world and the developing world. Is the business case tougher when it comes to being sustainable in the emerging world? Is it tougher or is it easier? Because sometimes disruption, innovation can be easier in the emerging world because you're starting without the baggage. But I'm curious.
I think that the difference that I see today is emerging markets and developing markets, they've been co-investing to develop and to accelerate transformation. And this is true from countries like China, where government does a lot of investments in terms of incentives, legislation for companies that are accelerating the transformation. And this is very helpful because once the government is incentivizing the change. You know that this is for the long term, so you can make your own investments and accelerate that. And countries like Brazil, where you already have, like, for example, hydropower is majority of the energy in Brazil, but it's still the government is helping the grid to develop and companies to accelerate. In other countries, I think that the transformation is going to be more expensive, especially in developed countries, because everything that involves investments is a little bit more expensive, and the legislation is still catching up to the pace of the society and the transformation. I think that it's going to make sense everywhere, but I see that in a way it's counterintuitive, but developing and emerging countries, they are moving slightly faster in the transformation because, as you said, it's the right moment with the right infrastructure that needs to be built, and people want to get there faster.
Right. And in many ways, they can start from a clean slate versus, as you said, in the developed world, it's a little trickier. All right. So I mean, I'm thinking about, and I think we started to touch upon it, but I'm thinking about, we love talking to someone like you because you have such a global view and you're seeing what's going on in the consumer. When you look at the outlook, is there anything that worries you about, you having to kind of focus on that more, whether it's the consumer not holding up this year, the global economy slowing down, global bankers making a policy mistake that complicates, what you're trying to do here when it comes to your sustainability initiatives? I mean, essentially, I want to know what you think about the global outlook.
No, I think that we are definitely moving into a better period after all these disruptions in COVID. I think that unfortunately we are not there yet 100%, because that some countries are getting now Omicron, and as you get the wave of Omicron, some more disruptions in supply chain will happen. I think that this will continue to be a topic this year, and more so in the first half of the year, while in the second half of the year things will be better, but it's not going to be fixed at all this year. So supply chain disruptions will continue to be part of our conversations. It's going to be more in the first half than in the second. The second big issue is inflation. I think that inflation is an issue globally. It's not going to be away very quick. We are still in the middle of the wave, and that has an impact in consumer purchase power, and this is everywhere. But of course, the more consumers are under pressure in developing and emerging countries, the more this will be a disruption. And then I think that the third point that's going to be for second semester is, once everything settles down, we will see that this difference between people in emerging developed countries and developing emerging countries will be different, the post-COVID, and we'll need to benefit from productivity. We'll need to benefit from the technology step up that we had during COVID, so we can close this gap. But I see like a tale of two different stories in the after COVID, this so-called elephant type of economy, right, where the developed mature countries will accelerate further, while the developing countries will need first to correct the trajectory and then later reaccelerate. But it's supply chain disruptions, it's inflation, and then the two stories of the mature and developing countries that will need to have different actions after COVID.
Yeah, continues to make it tricky. So I'm thinking about, because you guys have had such success, what would be your advice to some leaders out there, C-suite leaders who are saying, okay, we get it. We know we're kind of at a tipping point when it comes to climate change. Here's a company, AB InBev, that has set emission goals years ago, and they're hitting them ahead of schedule. What's your piece of advice to them on how to do it?
Yeah, I don't think I have like advice to give to all these clever people there. I think that I have a little bit of our own experience. And if I would say that is, what is the right side that you want to be in history? We all know what the right side is. Second is the confidence that you can find tools within your business to improve your own efficiency, to better connect your ecosystem around targets that are shared and make everybody more efficient. and that consumers are a very important part of this equation. So there is always a way to connect your brands and products with things that consumers want to support, and therefore you close the loop in how sustainability becomes part of your strategy and not a distraction. So for us, it's part of what you do. It's our business. We are in the sustainability business because we are inclusive, we are natural, and we are local. And when you think this way, your category and your products, they need to do what is right to do in terms of sustainability. So it's our business. No beer, no water, no barley, no beer. So we need to be there close to the communities.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think consumers certainly get it too. And I think, everybody does in your value chain. I do wonder, 2025 is your set of goals. Is there a period, do you think, where you don't have to have goals, that it's just the way we do business, that it's all part of sustainability initiatives are just the norm? Are we getting closer to that, Michel?
So you stole my line, because usually people ask me, what is your dream in terms of this thing? And I always answer that is when we talk about this as part of the conversation and not thinking that this is something special that needs to be highlighted separately from what we do otherwise, right? And I think that the more this is embedded in the business, the more we are doing the right things, and the more we are clear about the steps that we need to have, the better it's going to be, the easier it's going to be. So I think that is really embedding into your strategy and making sure that this is part of the conversation every day. That's why I announced when I started in the business, the promotion of Ezgi Barcenas and the appointment to be our Chief Sustainability Officer, because we work around the table and sustainability needs to be at the table. So that's why Ezgi was appointed to be our Chief Sustainability Officer. And she's part of each and every conversation that we have in business, in strategy, and in the financials that we have around the business. So it's being embedded into the strategy.
Your Chief Sustainability Officer is amazing. And I had a chance to talk with her last year, Ezgi, but it does, you're right. It shows that the CFO is important, but your Chief Sustainability Officer is up there, right, on that C-suite level. And it says a lot about a company.
Yes.
Michel, thank you so much for sharing what you guys are doing at AB InBev and your hopes for this year. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. I love
Michel,
the conversation. Take
you
care.
too. Take care. Michel Doukeris, CEO of AB InBev.
Bye-bye.
Be well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Francine Lacroix from Bloomberg TV, and I could not be more delighted to talk about what we can do to make climate change at the forefront of all of our sustainability efforts. Now, this panel is in 25 minutes, and we talk about the solutions for change to try and find some of the meaningful solutions that will really make a difference. So not just talking the talk, but actually putting the talk into actions. And I am very delighted to be joined now by Jim Andrew, Chief Sustainability Officer at PepsiCo, Rebecca Marmot, Chief Sustainability Officer at Unilever, and Punit Renjen, Global Chief Executive Officer at Deloitte. So thank you for joining us. It's going to be an interesting and robust conversation. Punit, everything that underpins, of course, what we've been trying to do post-Glasgow, what some of the company pledges we've seen across sectors and across regions, is really that there is a lot of people wanting to do better, but now we need to look at the actions. And you have this wonderful report called, the CXO Sustainability Report. So first of all, CXO is basically any C-suite. Are you optimistic about the future, or is there much more to be done?
Thank you for having us. I'm very optimistic about the future. There is a lot that needs to be done. There are some interesting aspects in that report. First, 80% of respondents, CXOs, believe that we are at a tipping point. Another 80% have been personally impacted by climate. And to me, I think that is an optimistic sign in terms of climate is here. Climate is here as a big issue, and that we as a business community are ready to embrace it.
What do you mean by tipping point? So are C-suite saying, look, we can do more? Or are they actually doing more? Are you disappointed by the pace of change?
Well, I think a tipping point in this, from a standpoint that customers are demanding it, employees are expecting it, and there is a disconnect between aspirations and actual outcomes, and that needs to be addressed. I'll give you one quick anecdote vis-a-vis Deloitte. 86% of the 350,000 professionals that call Deloitte home are Gen Zs and millennials. Their number one issue is climate. If I want to be able to retain the best, hire the best, I must have a credible response vis-a-vis climate. And so I think that to me is really the issue why I believe it's at a tipping point.
Jim, talk to me a little bit about PepsiCo. So how much, I don't know whether we want to talk in percentage form, but actually how much efforts do you think PepsiCo has done so far? And how much more can you do in the next 2 to 3 years to become more sustainable, either through recycling or packaging and all of that circle?
Well, I think that that's exactly the right question, which is how much and how much more. And at PepsiCo, we've been active in sustainability for a decade, but as some of the items that were mentioned in the report, things have continued to accelerate. And over the last 2 or 3 years, we've taken huge steps. Last year, we announced PepsiCo Positive, which is really our overarching strategic transformation of how we're going to change the entire company, how we grow and how we create value by really helping to create a more sustainable food system and make changes for the planet and people, but importantly also for our business. So we've made a lot of changes, but I think the next couple of years, whether it's climate or packaging or water, all those areas that are important to our business are going to be places where we're going to be continuing to make real progress. And we've announced very clear goals, and we have very clear plans to go after those really important areas for our business.
Rebecca, where do you identify, a disconnect maybe on what Unilever wants to do, but also the difficulties in achieving it?
Well, firstly, Punit, congratulations on the report, because I think you've exactly hit the nail on the head. It's all about now taking all the commitments, and it's brilliant to see over the past few years that lots and lots of companies are setting net zero targets and setting up very ambitious plans around what they want to do on climate. But actually, it's now about putting it into action. So we've tried very hard to do that. We launched last year at our AGM a climate transition action plan, which really set out exactly what we want to do and when we want to do it by. And I think crucial as well, it's not just around short-term targets, it's around, long-term targets, it's also around short-term targets. So we set ourselves interim dates at a 3-year basis to update on where we are on net zero, what we're doing in our operations, what we're doing across the value chain, the brands, the products, and how we can bring that to life through wider society.
So, Jim, you've identified, a couple of areas where, of course, you have set targets and say, we'll work on this to make it better. What's hardest in those areas? Is it the packaging? Is it the plastic? Is it the supply chain? And is it only by saying what's, tough and difficult that you think shareholders will maybe believe you more, and you need that extra push to really get things done?
We've set goals that actually in all the areas that are important to us, I would say are quite aggressive and therefore challenging. But to Rebecca's point, if you don't set bold long-term goals, you're never going to make the progress you need in the short term. And while that may sound counterintuitive, I think that it actually fits very nicely. We've got to be making progress every year. And so we've got by-year plans across all of our goals so that by 2030 and for climate net zero by 2040, we've really landed in a key set of areas that are important to our business, real meaningful progress. Which is hardest, as I say, I think they're all challenging, but that's what's, is necessary for the planet and for people, and why we've really wrapped them all together as part of a holistic plan to transform what we do. In terms of, how we communicate that, I think it's really about transparency and it's about consistency. We every year report where we are against each of our goals, and along the way, if we can, we give interim updates. So it's that transparency and that rigorous methodologies and measurements that's going to really help build trust, but also help build momentum and progress.
Francine, if I If I may, just real quickly, I want to highlight a couple of points that Jim and Rebecca made. First, I think this is we certainly have to set long-term targets, but we have to demonstrate that we're making progress here and now. And I think that is really important. Jim made a point around transparency, and I think that's really important as well. Being completely honest and transparent in terms of the progress being made against science-based targets. And consistency in terms of measurement is important, both from a regulatory standpoint, but also from a company comparability standpoint. And I think that those are all areas that we need to work on.
But Punit, and this is highlighted in your report, right? That there's a clear disconnect between executives being very ambitious, wanting to do targets, and then the actual impact. So how do you make sure that progress is really made? At the moment, we're still talking about frameworks, about definitions, about how we can compare. Like, what will actually make a difference that can save our planet?
Well, I think there is, it's easier, I would say, for a private enterprise, even though a large private enterprise like Deloitte, because I can take a longer term view. But there is a disconnect because of the short-term orientation in terms of what public companies are under versus the long-term and the action required. I think that's one key aspect. I think there is now a demonstration, maybe not a clear causal link, that entities, companies that are focused on climate, it is not only the right thing to do, it is the right business thing to do. I gave you the example of Deloitte. If 86% of my professionals rank climate and ESG issues as their top priority, as the leader of this organization, I must have a credible response if I want to be able to retain them and to hire them. And so it does make good business sense. And I think demonstrating that and putting that into the narrative will enable companies to make the investments, the short-term investments, and see the payoff that will take longer than the short term.
You know, the problem, Rebecca, I remember actually speaking to a big chief executive who sold shampoos, and he told me people want to, buy things that are better for the environment, but then if it's a choice between that shampoo that's better for the environment or have glossy hair, they'll always go for the glossy hair. So where do you see the pressure coming from? Is it shareholders? Is it civil society? And how much did Glasgow and COP26 help?
I think it. Sorry,
yeah, Rebecca first, and then I'll come to Punit.
Yeah, I think it's all of those. When you look at the Deloitte report that came out this morning, you look at things like the Edelman Trust Barometer. It is widespread that multi-stakeholder model, so it's shareholders and it's consumers and it's employees that we heard Punit talking about before. 78% of people agree businesses should adopt science-based targets, and they believe business should put climate change experts into leadership positions. Crucially, to your point, 64% of people in that Edelman Trust Barometer survey said they boycott a brand based on their beliefs about climate change. So I think the challenge, but also the opportunity for companies like Unilever and Pepsi, it's great to have Jim on the call, is making sure that you're producing really high quality products, but at the same time, affordable products accessible to everybody, but actually they're offering the level of performance that people want from their products, and they're able to protect the planet. When we look at the taking action part that Punit's been talking about this morning, we've really tried to concentrate on our portfolio over this past couple of years and moving forward and say, how do we do that on a day-to-day basis? So for example, across our home care portfolio, we've launched something called Cleaner Future. So we're eliminating all of the fossil fuel-derived carbon out of our cleaning and laundry products and putting in instead different options, so blue carbon, purple carbon. So we can do things like, for example, last year, we launched a laundry capsule, which was made out of captured and recycled industrial carbon emissions in China. So I think it's using that kind of tech to come up with product opportunities, which are really enticing to people. Things like Sif-A refill. Instead of buying a new spray every time you want to clean your surfaces, cleaning around the kitchen, you just buy a little top-up bottle and you put it into the original spray that you've got. So we're saving masses of plastic being able to do that.
I know. I mean, that's, I guess, just scratching the surface, right? Because there's so much more that we can do. I have a great audience question for both Jim and Rebecca. Jim, you can start us off. Do you purchase carbon offsets to actually accomplish your overall sustainability goals?
We do not. We are committed to reducing our carbon footprint. And so our goals for 2030, which are 40% of our scope 1 and 2, so the things we directly control, and 75%, 75% for scope 1 and 2, the things we directly control, and 40% for scope 3, which is all the rest of our value chain. Those targets we will hit without using offsets. So because we believe it's really important to reduce. And that aligns very well with the science-based targets, where our targets are science-based and have been certified. So we use insets to offset, for example, the full emissions impact of our business air travel, but those are projects directly in our supply chain. So short answer to your question, no, we are not using offsets to reach our goals until the very end, which everybody would acknowledge is necessary. 2030 goals, 100% around reductions.
Rebecca, to this great audience question.
Yeah, so very similar, exactly the same. We're focusing on absolute emissions reductions. So I think one of the risks with offsetting is it actually distracts from reducing emissions and tangible action that you can take straight away as a priority. So for us, it's all about reducing emissions in the short term. And I think actually the 5 stages, Punit, that you set out in your report this morning around looking at tangible things that all businesses can do to try and make a difference, for us is where we feel we have to start. So it's how do you bring it to life through your products? How do you work right the way across your value chain? So, for example, we're working now with our upstream suppliers to reduce carbon emissions for about 60% carbon emissions with our top 300 suppliers. We're doing the same thing with our retail partners. We're thinking about how we do our sourcing. So we've just launched, for example, a renewable agriculture code with Knorr, looking at how can we farm in a more efficient way. So making sure that we're reducing the carbon in our own operations, we're reducing it across our supply chain. We're working, for example, on things like water stewardship across all our manufacturing sites. So really, I think looking at those different touch points across your value chain and making sure you've come up with a plan for each different segment.
Rebecca, what's the one thing you wish you were doing better?
I think we've made really good progress. I think the absolute key for us, and we've learned this over the past 10 years on the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which ran from 2010 to 2020, is there's a lot that we can do as a business through communications campaigns and through the work that we're doing with our brands to encourage consumers to make small differences in their lifestyle. So, for example, if you're using a washing machine, you turn to 30, you wash it at a short wash cycle. But I think what we really discovered is the optimal thing that we can do is help to drive change in wider society. And actually to do that, we have a massive role to play as Unilever, but it's about working with others as well. So how do you get, for example, lots of companies to sign up to the climate pledge that was launched around COP26? How do you get participation in really big cross-sector collaborations, RE100, or cargo owners for zero emission vessels, etc.? So I think it's about pushing the whole of society forward and taking these kind of approaches. And Punit, we've called that out a number of times in the report.
So Punit, when you look at, of course, some of the work that you've done in the survey, what are the main obstacles that you see holding back, chief executives or C-suite in general to try and achieve some of these, life-changing goals?
Well, 97% of the companies or the executives that we surveyed, 2,000 of them, have climate as a key agenda item. So I think the acknowledgement that we have to address the issue is the first step. Most have a strategy in terms of how they're going to get there. I think the real disconnect is between the pace. 2040, 2050, I think is appropriate, but I think we need to front load it. The second is around execution. It requires relentless execution, and it requires an organizational change from a mindset standpoint, but also in terms of how we are implementing. And then Jim and Rebecca have mentioned this. We have to, in a transparent way, publish the progress that we are making, build the trust in the progress that we are making, but also acknowledge that this is not easy. It is. It will require work. Certainly at Deloitte, we acknowledge that. We've made a commitment that we'll be net zero by 2030. And it will require significant work and a significant change in the way that we operate, in the way that we travel. Travel is a big component of our carbon footprint. It reduced 41%. We were aided to some extent by the pandemic. Now maintaining that level of reduction is going to take work. And so it is hard work.
I have a couple of great questions actually on materials used for packaging, but maybe, Jim, a simple but also a hard question on Glasgow. I don't know whether COP26 was a catalyst for good or whether there's a danger that a lot of companies and a lot of industries did a lot of effort in the lead up to COP26 and then kind of now are resting on their laurels.
I don't know many companies that are resting on their laurels. I think the lead up work was great. And I think there's a whole lot more to do. You know, only 17% of the Fortune 500, according to WWF, only 17% have science-based targets for climate. So there's still a huge, huge opportunity for the other 83%. I think, you know, if I were to just highlight two areas for real progress after Glasgow, one is, you know, collaboration and partnership. And, you know, I'll work with almost anybody who shares the goals that I have. You know, we work a lot with Unilever. We've got some great collaborations there. But I think it's going to take all of us. And so collaboration and partnership, and I think that's a real benefit coming out of Glasgow. I think we've seen a lot more of that. You know, I spoke there around a partnership that we've got with Mars, McCormick, and Guidehouse, and, you know, that with our suppliers. There's a whole lot of others. So I think collaboration and partnership is one real lever. And the other we've talked about is how do we continue to shine a bright light, build trust around transparency and consistency of measurement, and really making that progress that Deloitte talks about in the report. You know, so I think I'm optimistic coming out of Glasgow, and there's still a lot of work to do, and we all need to really put our shoulder against it. But it's the right thing for the planet. It's also the right thing for business, and I think that's the really powerful thing that came out of Glasgow's. People saw that.
Rebecca, do you agree that, you know, collaboration is always a good thing, but actually, do we need to be more aggressive with targets? I don't know whether it's linking compensation, whether, you know, how do you put sustainability really at the center of every business decision in a company?
Yeah, I agree, Jim, with you. I think COP progress was made. Of course, there was always more that we could do, but we decided actually this year, or last year, I should say, end of 2021, we went to COP as a partner. So not just the work that we're doing at a corporate level, but we also went along with our brands to try and really engage day-to-day consumers around the changes that they could make. And we all saw what came out of COP. There were some good targets and there were some good resolutions. But I think now it's really, I guess, a couple of areas. One is really looking at what we can do. You know, we're big global companies, but what can we do at a country level to work with governments to make sure that at a country level, country governments are setting net zero targets. I think there's things that we can do, you know, letters to trade organizations, business groups. We want to make sure that the current lobbying positions that our industry groups are taking on climate policy are consistent with our own position around the 1.5 degree ambition set out in Paris, and making sure that other organizations we're working with are setting science-based targets. I think the point about linking it to performance is absolutely critical. So we have had now for the past 10 years, 25% of the performance plan for manager level and above, so that's about 14,000 people across Unilever, is linked to what we call our SPI. It's our Sustainability Progress Index. So we take one target from each of the 8 pillars of what we call our compass, our integrated business and sustainability plan, and then we measure how far we're progressing against those targets, and then that leads to 25% of the performance plan for managers. And I think, you know, that really, really helps to focus. And I think also, to your point, right, it isn't about me and my team delivering this. This is about working across supply chain. It's about R&D, thinking about innovation. It's about marketing and really making sure that it is spread right the way across the business.
I think, Francine, one thing that COP focused on was governments. And I think business has to play a very, very big critical role. In fact, maybe the most important role. And, you know, we've talked about scope 1 and 2 commitments and scope 3 commitments. Deloitte has taken it one step further. We have 350,000 professionals, as I said. We have launched a training program with the World Wildlife Fund to train all 350,000 professionals around climate as to how they can, through their individual actions and through their communities, make a difference. I think that for all our companies, we employ a lot of people. I think that's an action that we can all collectively take.
And this is a great question from the audience member, which kind of feeds to what you were just saying. Are you putting pressure on government decision makers to accelerate some of the commitments to carbon negative or climate positive action? Punit.
Well, the answer is yes. We are absolutely engaging with public policymakers. Jim and Rebecca talked about common measurement. That is one area we need to have consistent measurement that is akin to financial measurement. And that's one area that we are actively working on. We've worked with 150 other companies to come up with one set of measures on people, planet, prosperity, and principles of governance using the metrics that exist today. And so getting to common metrics, I think, is an important step in related to the question that you just asked.
And Jim and Rebecca, we only have 2 minutes, so 1 minute each. On the flip side of that, what do your companies and your sector need from governments to actually achieve your goals faster? Jim?
We need policies that support the transition. So whether it's in packaging, smart, we actively support well-designed extended producer responsibility programs, whether it is incentives for regenerative agriculture. We've got a 7 million acre agricultural footprint. So programs that support regenerative agriculture, carbon emissions actions. There's a whole set of, we need policies that support companies and the rest of society as we make those transitions. And again, Francine, it gets back to collaboration. All of us have to work together to be able to make this transformation move forward. We're committed to doing that and working with governments and others to really move the right policies forward to help us all speed on that transition.
Rebecca, what do you need from governments? What does your business need from governments?
I agree, Jim. I mean, I think we haven't got time to talk about it now, but, calling on governments to adopt a global carbon pricing mechanism, I think that's really, really important. I think making sure that there is a framework in place. We, for example, hugely supportive of TCFD, and making sure that you are really pushing governments to have that kind of measurement framework in place, really looking at where investments are being made.
And Punit, what about you? I'm sure you're speaking also to world leaders. How can they support the global effort? Sometimes it feels like it's businesses that have been really filling that vacuum where governments were nowhere to be seen. How can you reverse that so that private and public work together?
This is the challenge of our generation. And Jim and Rebecca have said it eloquently. We all need to work together. Governments, business, civil society, and as individuals. It seems overwhelming if you look at it by individual entity, but working together, we can lick this.
All right. Well, thank you all for a very spirited and interesting conversation. Jim, Andrew, Rebecca, Marmot, and Punit Renjen.
Thank you.
Tackling the challenge of climate change requires all of us. But business leaders have a unique responsibility to help the world transition to a lower carbon future. Are they up to the challenge? Are their organizations doing enough, quickly enough? What can we learn from the ones making a measurable impact? Deloitte questioned more than 2,000 CXOs to find out. Most are taking action to combat climate change, but some companies set themselves apart.
Thank you for joining the virtual briefing, Climate Resilience, from Ambition to Impact. We hope you enjoyed these conversations. Thanks again to all of our speakers for a wonderful program, and thank you to our presenting sponsor, Deloitte, for making this virtual briefing possible. If you'd like more information from our sponsor, please visit the resources tab on your screen. And most of all, thank you for being such an engaged audience. To watch any part of this event, you can return to BloombergLive.com to view it on demand. Thank you for watching.